Hey friends, I have arrived in Houston. Here I am, and clearly they knew I was coming at my Airbnb because they've given me a perfectly theatrical looking backdrop to do my video posts from, which is amazing. Long day on the road, but really beautiful day. And, I did my post yesterday before I left, and that meant that I did not recount to you just exactly how that journey went initially. I was stuck on the highway yesterday, essentially parked for almost 3 hours because of a accident on the road. Thought I might, for a minute, get snowed in there. That did not end up happening. I sort of made it out in the nick of time, just before things got hairy, let's say. Me and my little Toyota Prius in the middle of the Texas highway in a snowstorm. But all went well. And the upshot of that delay was that I had a chance to do something sort of amazing, which I had actually, it was kind of my intention to do this, but I didn't know if I was going to get the time on the road. But basically, I listened to Alice Walker's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, start to finish. I started over at the beginning and listened to the whole thing yesterday on the road. And even though I was on the road for probably a good, I think in the end it was like 8 hours, including the delay. I only got about 3 hours down the road, but because I sat still for almost 3 hours, I was there. I was probably on the road about 7 hours. So I listened to that whole book, 3.5 hours, and took copious notes. I have probably a good 60 minutes of voice memos to review on that book alone. And then this morning I woke up and started listening to Chögyam Trungpa's Sacred Path of the Warrior again. And I had a feeling that juxtaposing those two books was gonna be kind of a cool experience. I just had a sense that there was something in there that was gonna be interesting, and man, did that notion ever deliver, because I basically spent yesterday kind of just deeply examining and really looking at what at the mind, at what our mind does. It's impossible to summarize Alice Walker's book in a post like this, but she essentially, if I had to delineate one major through line, it's the idea that given the way that most people grow up, given the childhood environments of most people, we end up not quite getting the unconditional love that we needed as a child. And so because of that, we then develop a whole slew of thought patterns and behaviors and impulses and responses and emotional conditioning and all sorts of strategies for getting the love of our parent kind of on the parent's terms, because as a child, we aren't able to set the terms. We need their love. It's a survival necessity. So we unconsciously simply deliver whatever the parent is looking for. And so instead, and of course what we receive is not actually love. It's not unconditional love. What we receive is the parent's affirmation for whatever it is that they have projected onto us. Now, this obviously happens in varying degrees of intensity. It happens to with varying degrees of trauma involved. But the pattern is largely the same. And so if I could summarize the book, which is really not fair to do, it's an audit or a survey of all the various substitutes for love that we might develop and carry into adulthood. And then it's also a beautiful, beautiful description of what healing is, because healing essentially amounts to feeling those things, feeling that lack that we're constantly trying to make up for, and mourning it, and properly mourning what we did not have when we needed it is healing. That's a very rough summary, and even as I think about it, I'm leaving all kinds of stuff out that I wish I'd said now. But that's kind of in a short amount of time. That's certainly one way of describing the kind of book in summary. Well, and so then when I woke up this morning and started listening to Chögyam Trungpa, he's talking about a lot of the same things. He's talking about, warriorship, but then if we get arrogant in our warriorship, or then if we're afraid of X, or then if we don't feel that we deserve blah, 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 and I was like, whoa, what showed up for me, and I didn't quite make it to the end of that book. I made it maybe 2/3 of the way through. What showed up for me so amazingly was this recognition that what Chögyam Trungpa is really describing in this, Shambhala teaching, rooted in Tibetan Buddhism, very clearly saying this is a secular practice. This is not a religious practice. It doesn't involve adherence to a particular theology or dogma. What he's really describing is psychology. It's a psychological process that originated thousands of years ago, before anybody had the tools of modern psychology, before anyone had the vocabulary of modern psychology to think about or talk about how these things work. And it kind of blew my mind to see them so close up next to each other. Now, that being said, what Chögyam Trungpa is ultimately talking about goes way beyond psychology. It doesn't stop with a healthy psychology. It takes a healthy psychology is kind of like the first phase of the work. And that was sort of what I also felt as I was listening to Alice Walker yesterday. I was just thinking to myself, oh my God, so what she's describing is really a process that basically amounts to clearing the addictions out of the mind, because addictions are simply our substitutes for unconditional love. That's what they are. They're all the erroneous ways in which we try to find love and ultimately can't, but for a short amount of time, for a temporary amount of time, we might feel that we have achieved it. The drama of the gifted child is essentially, one of the primary ways she talks about is achievement. We substitute achievement for love, and so we get that hit every time we validate or affirm the fact that we are achievers. We get this hit, and it tells us, "Oh, I'm loved," and then, of course, immediately, because that achievement is precarious, because the attributes that we've displayed in that achievement have worked today, but they could just as easily fail tomorrow. We're in a precarious situation, and that love never becomes stable. We never feel that we've fulfilled that unconditional love, because it's not unconditional. It's highly conditional, highly precarious. So when Chögyam Trungpa talks about a little bit of, we gain a little bit of warrior insight, but then we become arrogant, it immediately resonated in the same universe of sort of activity as I had just been listening to from Alice Walker. And it kind of hit me, oh my God, this spiritual practice is at the beginning of it, as we get going with it, it's a psychological practice. It's a practice that's designed to show us what the mind is doing, to show us the addictions of the mind, to reveal them to us, and to allow us to let them go. What Chögyam Trungpa doesn't say as explicitly as Alice Walker is that it is actually the mourning that frees us. It's actually that pain, that it's actually experiencing the pain of that loss, that irrevocable loss that we can never go back and fix. We can never go back to our childhood and make up for the unconditional love that we didn't receive. And mourning that loss is the actual healing. I do see a very strong parallel there between what Alice Walker is saying and what Chögyam Trungpa talks about when he says an open heart is a broken heart. There's an inherent kind of ongoing mourning in the open heart. And I think I see that almost as, the world is imperfect. We don't live in a perfect world. Therefore, an open heart is a broken heart. Anything in manifestation is inherently imperfect. It's inherently incomplete, And then, where that kind of leaves off, or where Chögyam Trungpa then takes a sort of further leap with this, is in recognizing, and especially when I realized, oh my God, this is actually a psychological practice passed down through millennia across generations and cultures that didn't have the vocabulary of modern psychology. Then I also realized, oh wow, this is actually the wrestling with being an infinite being. Our consciousness is infinite. So inherently, our interface with the universe, with the manifest universe, is infinite. Our consciousness is infinite. And especially as young children, our consciousness is infinite. We come into the world infinitely capable of awareness. And then we reckon with a finite world. We're trapped in a finite world. Our infinite intuition, our notion of our identity as infinite consciousness begins to be truncated by what feels like concrete reality, by what feels like information to the contrary, telling us we're not infinite, we're not omnipotent, we're small, we are not capable, there are beings and forces and circumstances and people and things that have power over us, and they don't always treat us with kindness, they don't always treat us as though we are infinite beings. And so we learn these lessons of finitude, trauma, as young people, and then as we grow into adulthood and we reach the point of launching our own spiritual journey and gradually taking full responsibility for our own spiritual life, then we can regain the capacity to say, well, wait a minute, am I really the victim of these forces? Is this really a problem that I have this pain? Or am I simply an infinite being in a finite universe, and I have to reckon with that? And so all of a sudden, it also makes sense to me that Chögyam Trungpa's tradition, which has been passed down for millennia, and which he certainly carried forward a great distance, but which ultimately he's passing down a lineage, that would be a practice of approaching everything as though it's all it needs to be. In other words, we can take the perspective of Alice Walker and the psychology of multiple generations of handing down trauma. But if you expand that out even further and you look at not 3 or 4 generations, but you look at 50 generations, 1,000 years, 60 generations, however many you just zoom out to that macro level and you start to go, wait a minute. can I really call it I've been traumatized? Can I really say I've been traumatized when what we have is a history of evolution of human beings, all of whom have been imperfect, and all of whom have inherited through the same mechanism this painful realization that we're not infinite, this painful reckoning with, I came into the world thinking that I was one thing and then I learned another lesson. Is that actually true? And of course, there's a regaining of our spiritual identity in maturity. But first we have to go through that process of what we've been programmed with, and what we have, all the ways we've been told no, all the ways we've been told I'm not worthy, I'm not infinite, I'm not as big as I thought I was, I'm not as capable as I thought I was. Not that those lessons are true, but that those are the lessons that we learned. So anyway, it was this incredible kind of like fractal growth that I was witnessing as I went from the kind of psychological dimension, jumped into the Chögyam Trungpa world, and saw, oh my God, this is a perfect fit. This is like literally, like if I was going to talk to someone 1,000 years ago about Alice Walker's work, this is the perfect terminology to do that without going into all of the nitty-gritty kind of like details that modern human beings we have vocabulary for. It outlines the process for the human being to realize these things. And then there's a kind of whoosh at the end of that when we go, oh my God, then, so from that, once we've gotten to that standpoint of essentially psychological health, letting go of the addictions, letting go of the programming, letting go of the patterns, letting go of all the substitutes for love, and we can realize that we are that love. We are the ultimate love in the universe, that we sought as a child, that we sought exteriorly as a child. That's the great error. That's the thing where you look at the situation, you go, oh my God, these poor kids, they think they need it from outside themselves. It's impossible to get it from outside themselves. Oh no, they're headed for a disappointment. But they too will grow up. They will arise. They will join the ranks of other people who've walked the path, and they will reach their spiritual maturity. Well, all we can really do is set them up for that possibility. Instill them with a sense that that's possible. And then they can do that for themselves. That's certainly what my parents have done for me. Were they perfect? No. But they set me up to figure out that I'm perfect. They set me up to learn my lessons in that way. Anyway, this is a long post, and I could go on for another half hour, so I'm going to stop. But I literally have hours of voice memos from the drive to review. So hopefully I'll be coming back to you with more of this soon, if you find it as unbelievably fascinating as I do. Thank you for watching. I love you. I appreciate you. Welcome to Houston. Maybe I'll give you a little tour of the apartment next time. Mwah. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow.